When I was little, my parents were overly protective of me. I didn't have much freedom in my life. I wasn't even allowed to go to the bathroom alone until I was 8 years old. But the truth is, that wasn't really my parents' fault. Before I was born, they had another child, a boy named Jacob. They loved him so much that, as a kid, I sometimes felt like they loved him more than me. Then came the day that changed everything. They got distracted for a little while, or maybe they just weren't paying enough attention, and suddenly, Jacob disappeared. He was only 9 years old. He vanished without a trace. They never found his body, so there was always a glimmer of hope that he might still be alive. They searched for him for 7 months, but almost a year later, my mother became pregnant with me. I never met him, but I've always felt a strange connection to him. My parents used to say that they were afraid of me when I was little because I would always talk to a specific corner of my closet. Whenever they asked, "Who are you talking to?" I would answer, "Jacob, my big brother." I was barely 3 years old at the time. No one had ever told me about him. There was no way I could have known I even had a big brother. Sometimes, I tell myself it must have been some psychological response to my parents' overprotectiveness. But deep down, I always felt like he was really there with me. The first time I remember him talking to me, I was 5 years old. I was sitting in my room, coloring, when Jacob came up behind me and tugged at my pigtails. "What are you coloring?" he asked. I hated when he pulled my hair, but he always did that. Proudly, I showed him my drawing. "Look. It's a garden with fairies, trees, and a little deer." He chuckled mockingly and said, "That looks like real gardens. If you want to draw a real one, you have to see a garden first. Come with me." He grabbed my hand with his cold fingers and pulled me outside. In the backyard, he handed me a small shovel, the one I sometimes used to help my mom in the garden. "Dig here," he said. I did as he asked. I dug and found some ordinary things, bugs, rocks, roots. But then I found something else. I saw Jacob smile as I pulled it out of the dirt. It was a backpack, maybe red once, but now it looked old and worn. It was a bit heavy, which meant something was inside, but the zipper was rusted shut. Jacob smiled strangely and said, "No worries. We'll open it later." Suddenly, I heard my mom calling out in a panicked voice. "Lily? Lily?" She saw me outside, and before I could understand what was happening, Jacob quickly grabbed the bag from my hands. "What are you doing out here? Don't go outside alone again, please," she scolded. I protested, but I wasn't alone. She looked confused. "What do you mean?" I turned around to point at Jacob, but he was gone. I hesitated, then muttered, "Nothing." She pulled me inside and led me to my room. "Please, stay in here. You have to stay safe until—" She never finished that sentence. I never liked my room. Even as a child, I always felt something was wrong with it. I never felt truly alone in there, and I always felt suffocated whenever I was inside. But the closet. I hated it the most. Every time I had to change my clothes, I would close my eyes and grab anything quickly without looking. It didn't matter if my outfit matched or if I liked it, I just wanted to get away from that closet as fast as possible. Suddenly, Jacob appeared behind me. My whole body started to tremble. He looked at what I was looking at, the closet. "You're scared of it, aren't you?" he asked. I nodded anxiously. He looked at me, then at the closet. "Sometimes, you have to face your fear to overcome it," he said. He walked toward the closet slowly, then suddenly flung the doors open. Then, he gestured for me to come closer. And because I trusted Jacob, my big brother, I didn't hesitate. "Go inside," he told me. I closed my eyes and stepped in. Before I realized what was happening, he shut the doors behind me and left me in the darkness, alone. Fear consumed me. I started calling out to him, crying, but he didn't answer. I curled up in a corner and sobbed. terror filled every inch of my being. The silence was horrifying. It wasn't comforting, no. It was the kind of silence that cracked your bones. And I felt it, like someone else was there with me in the closet, watching me. To calm myself down, I started tapping on the wooden walls. Until I found a specific spot. A spot that sounded hollow. I had always hated that corner of the closet. It was the scariest part of the room. Finally, I heard my mother calling me for dinner. I took a deep breath and stepped out of the closet. When I did, Jacob was gone. And when I told my parents about him, my mother said, "Never talk about Jacob again. Ever." And for a while, I obeyed. I don't remember many important things that happened after that night, at least not until I was about 8 years old. And I don't remember if that was the first time I spoke to him again after the closet incident. But this time, it was important. I was 8 years old when Jacob took me to my dad's office and showed me his computer. There were fun games I could play. I played for a bit, but then he said, "Enough playing. Open Google. I need you to search for something." I opened Google and looked at him. "Search for Jacob Holden," he said. I hesitated. "But, that's you." He nodded but said nothing. I typed his name and clicked on the first article. Jacob Holden, a 9-year-old boy, disappeared from his home in Colorado on March 12, 2003, without a trace. The only thing missing from his room was his school backpack. Police questioned his parents, Jennifer and Carl Holden, but unfortunately, they reached no conclusions. No one saw him leave the house, and no one saw him leave school. I looked at Jacob, my hands shaking. A school backpack? Like the one we found? Without a word, he took me to where he had hidden the backpack in my dad's office. He pointed at a pair of scissors on the desk. I knew what he wanted me to do. I hesitated, but he pleaded, "Please." I did what he asked. I cut the backpack open, and I found everything inside. A passport in the name of Jacob Holden, his birth certificate, and every piece of identification proving who he was. But why was it buried in our backyard? And then, I started thinking about everything. My parents never let me go outside alone. The bag was buried outside, with everything in it. The article said my parents hardly cooperated with the police, even though they told me they searched for Jacob for 7 months. And no one had seen him leave the house. That's when I understood. The hollow part of the closet. I looked at Jacob, and he could tell, I had figured it out. Slowly, he pointed at a hammer. "You know what you have to do." My entire body was shaking. I grabbed the hammer and ran to my room. I was terrified, no, I was horrified. I found the hollow spot, and I started breaking through the wall. You know what they don't tell you about bodies? If they're sealed in a closed space, like behind a wooden closet wall, they don't decompose like you think. No, they dry up. Like jerky. Jacob had starved to death. That meant he was still alive when he was put behind that wall. I never saw my parents again. The police took me to live with my aunt. But most importantly, I never saw Jacob again. And I miss him. The last time I saw him, I was sitting in the police car. They were taking me to a shelter until they found a relative willing to take me in. I looked back at our house, at my bedroom window, and I saw Jacob. He was standing there, looking at me and smiling. He waved at me, and I smiled back. Maybe he could never leave that place, but he did everything he could to make sure I would escape and get away from my insane parents. The police later proved that they were part of a certain cult, one that sacrificed their children to the devil when they turned 9 years old. And thanks to Jacob, I'm still alive. I wasn't just another satanic sacrifice.
Like, subscribe and don't forget to hit the bell icon to never miss a scare.